The shock of betrayal doesn't always come from strangers or enemies. It often cuts the deepest when it comes from those you believed would protect you no matter what. Lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by sterile walls and the beeping of machines, I told myself one thing to keep going: at least I had the love and support of my family. I thought about my engagement ring often, not just as a piece of jewelry, but as a symbol of love, commitment, and a future I was fighting to return to. It wasn't just about diamonds and gold, it was about the promises it carried, the memories tied to it, and the way it made me feel grounded even in my weakest moments. But when I returned home and discovered it was gone, sold off as if it were nothing more than an object to be discarded, the pain that struck me was unlike anything I had ever felt. My body may have been healing from the hospital stay, but my heart suddenly bore a wound much deeper. The betrayal hit like a tidal wave. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe it was misplaced, maybe it was being cleaned, maybe someone had simply moved it for safekeeping. My mind raced to give them the benefit of the doubt because parents aren't supposed to hurt you like this. Parents aren't supposed to take something so meaningful without asking, without explaining. But when the truth spilled out, when I realized that my parents, the very people who gave me life and were supposed to shield me from pain, had willingly made the decision to sell my engagement ring, my entire sense of security cracked. It wasn't about the money, it was about the choice. They chose to strip me of something precious while I was vulnerable, while I had no voice, while I was too weak to defend what was mine. The sting of that realization made the hospital feel like a safe haven compared to the coldness I felt in my own home. I replayed every conversation with them in my mind, searching for clues. Did they ever mention financial struggles? Did they ever ask me what the ring meant to me? Did they even pause to consider that maybe the ring was more than an ornament, more than just a luxury? And then the cruelest thought of all crept in: did they know how much it meant and still decide their reasons outweighed my feelings? The answer settled in my chest like a stone. They knew. They must have known. Parents aren't blind to the significance of an engagement ring. They understood it was not just a piece of jewelry but a piece of my heart. And yet, when the moment came, they didn't hesitate to sacrifice it. That was the sharpest betrayal of all, realizing the people who should have cared the most chose convenience over compassion. The ring had been with me through so much already. I remembered the day it was placed on my finger, the way my hands shook, the tears in my eyes, the certainty in my heart that this was a chapter of my life I would never forget. That ring wasn't just a marker of a proposal, it was a memory, a milestone, a reminder that love was real and worth holding on to. To have it stolen from me, not by thieves in the night but by the hands of my own parents, made me question what was truly safe in my life. If they could take that away, what else would they be willing to take? If they could look at my suffering and still justify their actions, what did that say about the foundation of our bond? Every time I pictured them making that decision, my chest tightened. Did they talk about it casually, as if selling my ring were just another errand? Did they weigh the options, or did they immediately jump to the conclusion that my feelings didn't matter? I imagined them holding it, handing it over to someone else, watching as a stranger slipped it into a bag, exchanging it for money that would soon vanish into fleeting moments of celebration. And I imagined myself, still lying in that hospital bed, unaware that the symbol of my future was already being stripped away. The image was almost unbearable, like a cruel twist of fate where I was fighting to recover, and they were erasing pieces of my life at the very same time. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the silence. They didn't ask, they didn't warn me, they didn't give me the dignity of making a choice. They decided for me. They decided my voice didn't matter, my attachment didn't count, my bond to that ring was irrelevant compared to what they wanted. That silence was deafening, and it shattered the trust one had carried for years. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it never returns in the same form. Sitting with that realization, I knew my relationship with my parents would never look the same again. When the truth finally came out, the justification my parents gave was like pouring salt into an open wound. They didn't deny it. They didn't show shame or even hesitate when I confronted them. Instead, they looked me in the eye and explained, almost casually, that the money from my engagement ring had gone toward paying for my brother's party. A party. Not medical bills. Not an emergency. Not something that saved a life or even solved a pressing crisis. Just a celebration, a night of fun, a moment of laughter and music that would fade into memory while I was left to carry the emptiness of what they had taken. Hearing them speak those words made me feel as if I had stepped into some alternate reality where my pain didn't matter, where my sacrifices meant nothing, and where my value as a daughter was smaller than the thrill of my brother's big night. I remember staring at them, waiting for the real explanation. My mind kept spinning, trying to find a hidden reason behind their choice. Maybe they were embarrassed to admit they had debts, maybe they had made a mistake under pressure, maybe there was more to the story than they were letting on. But no, there wasn't. It was exactly what it sounded like. They had weighed their options, looked at my ring, and decided that my brother's happiness, his image, and his fleeting joy were more important than my trust, more important than my love, more important than the future that ring symbolized. That wasn't just a justification, it was a statement, one that told me clearly where I stood in their priorities. The way they explained it made the betrayal feel even deeper. They spoke about my brother as though his celebration was a necessity, something the whole family had to rally behind. They painted it as if he deserved it, as if his milestones mattered more than mine. Every word was laced with the kind of favoritism I had felt in small doses growing up but never thought would lead to something this extreme. I could hear it in their tone, the way they spoke about his achievements, the way they framed the party as a moment the entire family should be proud of. Yet I was left wondering, was my engagement not an achievement worth celebrating? Was the ring on my finger not a milestone for the family too? Why was my happiness so disposable compared to his? It was impossible to ignore the imbalance. I had been in a hospital bed, my body weak, my spirit clinging to hope, while my parents were planning and funding a party. They had stood by me in the hospital, or so I thought, but in reality, their minds were elsewhere. They had been preparing for his night, not my recovery. That realization stung because it showed me how invisible my needs had become to them. The message was clear, his joy was worth sacrificing my treasure. Their justification wasn't just about money, it was about priorities, and I wasn't at the top of theirs. As I listened, anger began to rise inside me, not just because of what they had done but because of how easily they excused it. They spoke as if the ends justified the means, as if I should understand and even agree that a party outweighed the significance of my engagement ring. They expected me to see their decision as reasonable, almost noble, because it kept my brother happy, because it let him shine. But the more they spoke, the more I felt the distance between us growing wider. I couldn't recognize their logic, and I couldn't fathom how parents could look at their daughter, still recovering, and choose to defend such a choice with pride instead of shame. What hurt most was the lack of remorse. If they had been trembling, if they had struggled to admit what they did, if they had even shown the smallest flicker of guilt, maybe I could have believed that deep down they regretted it. But they didn't. Their defense was firm, their voices steady, their reasoning unwavering. To them, it wasn't betrayal, it was necessity. To me, it was proof that I didn't matter the way I thought I did. They had drawn a line between me and my brother, and the justification they gave was the hammer that drove that line deeper into the ground. Every time I think back to that conversation, I can still hear their words echoing in my head. Words meant to rationalize, words meant to soothe, words meant to convince me to accept what they had done. But all those words did was twist the knife further. Instead of easing the pain, they sharpened it, because with every excuse they gave, they reminded me that my feelings were not their concern. They reminded me that in their eyes, I should have been willing to sacrifice without question, without protest, without hesitation. That kind of justification doesn't heal, it scars, and it lingers, turning trust into doubt and love into something that feels conditional. The emotional devastation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't just about losing a ring, it was about losing a sense of worth, of being valued by the very people I should have been able to trust the most. The moment I understood the truth, it felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I had been fragile already, trying to gather my strength back after days in a hospital bed, and I believed that home would be the place where I could finally rest, finally breathe without fear. Instead, home became the place where my spirit broke in ways that no illness could have managed. The physical pain of recovery suddenly seemed small compared to the weight pressing down on my heart. I would sit alone, staring at the spot where I used to keep the ring, and every time I thought about it, tears welled up in my eyes. That ring wasn't just an accessory I wore on my finger. It was a promise, a reminder of someone who loved me enough to dedicate his future to mine, and of my own dreams of building a life together. To see that promise stripped away by my parents' actions was unbearable. I felt discarded, unimportant, and invisible. It was as though the ring had been a symbol of my place in this family, and by taking it away, they were also taking away my significance. That realization haunted me, day and night, leaving me restless, unable to find peace in the walls of a home that no longer felt safe. The devastation spread into every corner of my being. My trust in them was shattered, and with it came a flood of doubts I couldn't silence. If they could do this, what else might they be capable of? If they could so easily sell something so precious to me, what did that say about how they saw me as a person? Did my happiness ever matter to them, or was it always about convenience, about pleasing someone else? The questions ran through my mind endlessly, eating away at any sense of comfort I once had. Every word they spoke, every glance they gave me afterward, felt tainted with betrayal. I began to look at them not as parents but as strangers I couldn't fully recognize anymore. The emotional devastation wasn't just a private burden, it began to shape how I interacted with the world around me. My relationship with my fiancé suffered because I carried guilt for something I hadn't done. I felt ashamed that the ring he worked so hard to give me had been sold without my consent, and though it wasn't my fault, the embarrassment clung to me. How could I explain to him that my own family had disrespected both of us so deeply? It made me withdraw, made me hesitant to open up, and made me wonder if the bond we shared would ever recover from the damage my parents had caused. That guilt only deepened the sadness, making me feel trapped between the person I loved and the family I was supposed to rely on. Even simple moments became painful reminders. Seeing other women with their engagement rings, hearing conversations about proposals, or noticing jewelry in store windows, it all felt like sharp reminders of what had been taken from me. Each reminder chipped away at my spirit, leaving me hollow, carrying a weight that no one around me could fully see. Outwardly, I smiled and nodded, but inside I was carrying the ache of betrayal, the sting of being devalued, and the loneliness of knowing that even those closest to me had chosen not to protect me. The devastation wasn't a moment, it was a shadow that followed me everywhere. I started to question myself in ways I never had before. Was I overreacting? Was I being selfish for wanting something that symbolized my love and my future? That's what my parents seemed to suggest when they justified their actions, and the thought planted itself in my mind like a poison. I doubted my own feelings, wondering if maybe I wasn't worth the respect I thought I deserved. That internal conflict ate at me, making me feel weak and confused. It was a cruel twist, to be betrayed and then to feel guilty for even feeling betrayed. The emotional devastation was layered, not just in the loss itself but in the way it distorted how I saw myself. The nights were the hardest. Alone with my thoughts, I replayed the betrayal again and again, the way some people replay an accident in their minds. I heard their words, saw their faces, and imagined the moment they handed over my ring in exchange for money. I couldn't stop picturing it, and each time I did, my chest ached with a heaviness that words couldn't capture. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was restless, filled with dreams that reminded me of what I had lost. The exhaustion only deepened the devastation, creating a cycle I couldn't escape. There's a kind of pain that lingers long after the wound has been made, and that's what I was left with. It wasn't just sadness, it was a loss of security, of identity, of belonging. The devastation was complete, and no matter how much time passed, it seemed to live beneath the surface, waiting to rise again with every reminder of what had been taken from me. Sibling favoritism had always existed in small, almost unspoken ways, but I never realized how deeply it ran until the day my parents sold my engagement ring to fund my brother's party. Growing up, there were hints, subtle moments where he seemed to get away with more, where his mistakes were brushed off with excuses, while mine were magnified and dissected. He was the golden child, the one they always seemed to place on a pedestal, and while I tried to ignore it for most of my life, I couldn't deny the pattern anymore after what happened. This time it wasn't about a missed curfew, or grades, or small privileges, it was about something sacred, something that carried my future in its very design. And once again, their choice made it painfully clear, he was the priority, and I was the afterthought. I kept thinking back to all the little moments that built up to this one. The birthday parties he had that seemed to grow more elaborate each year, while mine were quieter, smaller, almost treated like obligations rather than celebrations. The way they spoke about him in front of relatives, boasting about his accomplishments, painting him as the shining star of the family, while my successes were acknowledged politely but never with the same enthusiasm. It had always been there, in the background, but when they sold my ring for his party, it felt like all those past imbalances had been leading to this moment of cruel confirmation. It was no longer subtle favoritism, it was blatant, undeniable, and impossible to excuse. What hurt the most was how normalized it seemed to them. When I questioned them, their words reflected a mindset that had always existed beneath the surface. His joy was somehow more valuable than mine, his milestones more worthy of sacrifice, his comfort more deserving of protection. They spoke about his party as if it were a once-in-a-lifetime event, as if ensuring it was perfect justified any cost, even if that cost was my engagement ring. In their eyes, it wasn't a betrayal, it was simply doing what they always did, putting him first. And that realization shattered something inside me, because it meant this wasn't an isolated mistake. It was part of a larger pattern, one that had been unfolding my entire life without me fully acknowledging it. The favoritism created a wedge not only between me and my parents, but also between me and my brother. How could I look at him the same way, knowing that my happiness had been traded for his fun? Even if he hadn't asked for it, even if he had no part in the decision, the fact that it was done for him left a stain on our relationship. Every smile he wore at that party, every laugh he shared with his friends, was paid for with something that had been stolen from me. And while he may not have realized it, I could never forget. The resentment built quietly, hidden under the surface, but always present whenever I thought of him basking in the glow of a night that had come at my expense. There's a cruel irony in watching favoritism unfold in such a dramatic way. As a child, you hope that maybe things will even out as you grow older, that one day you'll stand on equal ground. But in that moment, I realized there was no balance. Their priorities were clear, and it wasn't me. It made me question my place in the family altogether. Was I simply a supporting character in a story where he was always the lead? Was I only ever meant to give, to sacrifice, to step aside so he could shine brighter? Those thoughts weighed on me, twisting the knife of betrayal even deeper. What made it worse was their lack of awareness about how damaging their favoritism had become. They didn't see the cracks it left in me, the way it eroded my confidence and sense of belonging. They acted as though their choice was logical, even expected, because of course his party needed to happen, of course his happiness mattered most. To them, it was natural, and to me, it was devastating. It showed me that favoritism doesn't just create inequality, it creates wounds that can't be easily healed, scars that stay even after the initial pain fades. In the days that followed, I replayed the party in my mind even though I hadn't been there. I imagined the music, the laughter, the glow of lights, the clinking of glasses, all fueled by the money they had gotten from my ring. I pictured him surrounded by friends, carefree and celebrated, while I sat with the weight of loss pressing down on me. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, joy and indulgence. On the other, pain and betrayal. And yet, to my parents, it was worth it. Their favoritism wasn't hidden anymore, it was out in the open, undeniable, and cruel in its clarity. The imbalance of love and attention within a family can be one of the most painful truths to face. When you realize that you are not valued the same way as your sibling, it changes everything. It alters the way you see your parents, the way you see yourself, and the way you define family. That ring was more than an object, it was proof of where I stood in their priorities. And when it was sold, it wasn't just the ring that disappeared. It was the illusion that I mattered to them as much as he did. The aftermath of their decision hung over everything like a heavy cloud that refused to move. Once the truth was out, nothing felt the same anymore. Every interaction with my parents became tense, every word between us weighed down by the invisible barrier of betrayal. Even when they tried to act normal, smiling at me or asking about my recovery, there was an emptiness behind their voices that I couldn't ignore. I saw them differently now. The trust that had once been unshakable was gone, and in its place stood suspicion and resentment. I kept wondering if every gesture of care had strings attached, if every word of comfort had conditions, if every act of kindness was just a distraction from the reality that when it mattered most, they chose against me. I started noticing the silence more than ever. They didn't bring up the ring again, almost as if ignoring it would erase the memory of what they had done. But for me, the silence screamed louder than any explanation ever could. It was a silence that told me they didn't want to face the consequences of their choice, that they preferred to pretend it never happened rather than confront the pain they had caused me. And so I carried that silence with me, like a shadow that followed me into every conversation, reminding me that no matter how many words were spoken, the one thing I wanted to hear, an apology, an acknowledgement, would never come. The aftermath wasn't just about strained relationships with my parents, it seeped into every part of my life. My fiancé looked at me with concern, trying to comfort me, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes too. It wasn't disappointment in me, but in the situation, in the fact that the symbol of our love had been treated like it meant nothing. He didn't say it out loud, but I could feel the tension whenever the topic came close to surfacing. It was as if the betrayal wasn't just mine to bear, it was his too, because the ring represented both of us. And knowing that my parents had disrespected not only me but also the bond we shared made the wound deeper. I found myself withdrawing from family gatherings, from phone calls, from moments that once brought comfort. The thought of sitting across from them, pretending everything was fine, felt unbearable. I couldn't laugh with them the same way, couldn't trust their words, couldn't see them without remembering the moment they chose a party over my happiness. The aftermath was isolation, not just from them but from the sense of family I had once relied on. Family was supposed to mean unconditional love and protection, but now it felt conditional, fragile, something that could be taken away the moment their priorities shifted. That realization changed the way I looked at family altogether. I also struggled with anger, a kind of anger I had never felt before. It wasn't the quick spark of frustration that fades after an argument, it was a slow, burning fire that stayed with me, simmering beneath the surface. I could feel it in my chest when I woke up in the morning, in my stomach when I tried to eat, in my mind when I tried to sleep. It was the kind of anger that came from being powerless, from having something precious taken away and knowing I couldn't get it back. I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand the depth of what they had done, but no amount of words could give me back what I had lost. That powerlessness made the anger sharper, and the aftermath of that feeling left me exhausted. There were moments when I wondered if I would ever feel whole again. The betrayal had left a mark that time didn't immediately heal. Even on days when I managed to smile, when I pushed the pain to the back of my mind, it would come rushing back with the smallest reminder, a piece of jewelry in a store window, a conversation about weddings, even just the sight of my parents' faces. The aftermath was constant, always waiting to remind me that something had been broken inside me. It was like carrying a scar on my heart, one that throbbed whenever I tried to forget, and yet, beneath the pain and anger, there was also a profound sadness. A sadness that came from realizing that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, I might never be enough in their eyes. That sadness weighed heavier than the anger, because anger could be released in words, in thoughts, in silence, but sadness stayed quiet, pressing down with a heaviness that made even simple moments feel difficult. The aftermath wasn't just about what was lost, it was about what it revealed, the truth about where I stood in my family's eyes. And that truth was a burden I never asked to carry. Family loyalty had always been something I believed in deeply, a value etched into me from childhood, reinforced by the idea that no matter what happened in the outside world, family would stand as a safe haven. But after what my parents did, I found myself questioning what true loyalty and sacrifice were supposed to look like. In my mind, loyalty meant standing by each other through hardship, protecting one another's happiness, and making choices that honored love and trust. Yet in their actions, I saw the opposite. They had redefined loyalty to fit their own narrative, choosing to prioritize a fleeting moment of joy for one child over the lifelong bond and trust of another. The moral reflection it forced upon me was painful, but it also revealed truths about family I had never wanted to face. I thought about sacrifice and how it's often portrayed as noble, as an act of love. Parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children, children are supposed to sacrifice for their parents, and siblings are supposed to support each other when life gets heavy. But the kind of sacrifice they made wasn't noble. They didn't sacrifice something of their own, they sacrificed something of mine. True sacrifice, I realized, comes from giving up something personal, something meaningful to you, for the sake of someone else. What they did was simply taking. They took from me to give to him, and then they tried to dress it up as though it were a reasonable choice. That wasn't sacrifice, it was betrayal disguised as necessity. I began reflecting on what loyalty should mean in practice. Loyalty isn't about always saying yes, it isn't about constantly appeasing one person while neglecting another. Real loyalty means fairness, respect, and honoring the bonds that tie us together. It means seeing each member of the family as equal in worth, even if their needs are different. When my parents sold my engagement ring, they showed me their version of loyalty was selective. It bent toward the son they adored, the one they wanted to celebrate, while leaving me standing on the sidelines, stripped of something I held dear. That selective loyalty revealed a hierarchy of love, one where my place was below his, and that truth stung deeper than the act itself. I thought often about what I would have done if the roles had been reversed. If my brother had been the one in the hospital, if he had been the one recovering, if he had been the one with something precious at stake, would they have taken it from him to give to me? Every instinct inside me screamed no. They would have protected his belongings, shielded his happiness, and ensured his milestones were preserved. That realization only highlighted how uneven the scales of loyalty were in our family, and it left me wondering why. What made me less deserving? What made him more? These weren't questions with easy answers, but they were questions I couldn't stop asking. In my reflection, I also considered the future. What would loyalty look like when I needed them again? Would they choose me when it mattered most, or would I always come second? Could I count on them in times of crisis, or would their loyalty always lean toward the brother whose happiness they seemed to treasure above all else? The uncertainty left me with a hollow feeling, because loyalty should never be in question. It should be steady, unwavering, something you can lean on without hesitation. But now, with every thought of them, I felt hesitation creeping in. I felt doubt replacing the certainty I once had, and that was its own kind of heartbreak. The moral reflection extended beyond just my family. It made me look at myself and what I believed I deserved. For so long, I had accepted small imbalances, brushed off the favoritism, and told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. But this moment forced me to confront the truth. By staying silent, I had allowed their version of loyalty to shape me, to convince me that my needs mattered less. It made me question how often I had put others before myself, how often I had sacrificed in ways that weren't asked of my brother. And as painful as it was, that reflection gave me clarity. Loyalty, real loyalty, wasn't about staying quiet and letting others decide your worth. It was about standing firm, about demanding the respect you knew you deserved, and about refusing to let anyone diminish your value, even if they were your own parents. Thinking about loyalty also made me reevaluate what family really meant. Blood ties might connect us, but loyalty is what sustains those connections. Without loyalty, without fairness, without respect, family becomes just a word, hollow and fragile. My parents had taught me a lesson I never asked to learn, that not everyone who shares your blood will honor your heart. And in that painful realization, I began to understand that true family might not always be the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the people who choose you, who stand by you without hesitation, who prove through their actions that your happiness matters just as much as theirs. The reflection stayed with me, shaping the way I looked at relationships beyond family too. I found myself valuing honesty more, valuing fairness, and watching carefully to see who showed loyalty through their actions and not just their words. It was as if losing my ring and seeing my parents' betrayal had sharpened my vision, allowing me to see people for who they truly were. And though the pain was immense, the lesson was undeniable. Loyalty cannot be selective, sacrifice cannot be theft, and love without fairness is not love at all.